This is the first time a woman has come to the gym to find her husband, but the staff said her husband had already cancelled his membership 3 months ago. When the woman got home, she found that her husband had left his phone at home. Her sixth sense made her unable to resist opening the phone to check it, but there was nothing on it. Ella put the phone down and felt that she had overreacted. At that moment, the phone suddenly received a text message saying, "Where are you?" Seeing the message that had been withdrawn, Ella had a bad feeling in her heart, so she called a colleague and asked him to help locate her husband's smartwatch. She went to the location where the watch was located and found it near the gym. Ella got back in the car and started waiting. At that time, she received a call from her best friend. On the phone, her best friend thanked Ella for holding the unveiling ceremony for her work. Hearing her best friend's warm words, Ella's eyes instantly filled with tears. Her best friend heard Ella's choking and anxiously asked her what was wrong. However, at that moment, Ella saw the figure of her husband, so she quickly hung up on her best friend. She saw her husband standing not far away, pacing back and forth, looking at her watch every now and then, as if waiting for someone. A few minutes later, a woman came from behind and blindfolded her husband. What Ella never expected was that this woman was her best friend Amy. Watching the two of them leave hand in hand, Ella felt the sky fall apart in an instant. Her mother passed away early, and she grew up with her stepfather. But Ella was smart, hardworking and studious since she was young, so she grew up to become the chairman of a furniture company. After getting married, Ella gave birth to her daughter Ruth. Because she was usually busy with work, her husband Soo Shunyong took on the role of housewife. She thought she had the happiest life. However, for the past 7 years, she had been receiving anonymous text messages and letters. Ella had always ignored them, until one night, while she was working overtime at the company alone, a man in black walked into the office and pushed over the shelf where she kept her trophies. Ella heard a noise and came out to check. At that moment, she suddenly received a text message. The text message contained a photo of the flower basket she had thrown away. It said, "A person who betrays their friends is unforgivable." Ella felt something was wrong and immediately called the police. But as soon as the call was connected, the man in black chased her out of the next room. Ella saw this and had to run for her life. In the panic, her phone fell to the ground. Ella ran back to her office and locked the door. She wanted to call for help, but found that the phone and internet were not working well. Outside the door, the man in black was using a drill to pick the lock. Since the lock was of really good quality, the man in black simply smashed the glass. Ella hid under the table in fear. Seeing the man in black holding a hammer getting closer and closer to her, Ella was already trembling with fear. Luckily, the security guard arrived at this time. The black-clad man had to flee immediately upon seeing this. Later, the police arrived at the scene to investigate, but today's company surveillance was undergoing regular maintenance, so for the time being, there was no way to know the suspect's appearance, and the company had been notified of the surveillance maintenance via email, which meant that everyone in the company was a suspect. The next day, Ella stood in the office and looked at all the employees, trying to analyze who was most likely to have attacked her last night. At this time, she suddenly remembered that there was a camera on the furniture module on her desk yesterday. Ella did not find that module, but she accidentally found a parking ticket on the ground that didn't belong to her. She took the parking ticket to the parking lot and got the car key from the security guard. Ella found a white car. After some searching, Ella found the shirt that the man in black was wearing last night in the trunk. She returned the key to the security guard and then lurked near the car. Soon she saw In Tai-woo open the car door, and this In Tai-woo was her best male friend. Ella really didn't think that her best friend would want to kill her, so she called her husband Soo Shunyong for help, but Soo Shunyong's phone was unanswered. That's why Ella went to the gym to find her. But who knew her husband was having an affair with her best friend? Betrayed by her friend's husband and her best friend one after the other, Ella felt bad enough. At that time, an insurance investigator named Lewis found her again. From Lewis, she learned her stepfather had once bought insurance for her mother worth 500 million won. The reason the investigator approached her was because they had missed one point, which was that Ella's mother had been admitted to the hospital 3 times for while she was still alive, although the hospital records at the time stated that she had eaten it by mistake. But who could eat pesticide by mistake 3 times? And these things Ella had never heard her stepfather mention. At night Ella walked alone on the street. She felt as if she had lived a joke. However, at this time a black-clad man appeared behind her. In a panic, Ella desperately ran forward. Unexpectedly, she was still caught by the black-clad man, and then he threw her into the river. When Ella woke up in the hospital, she saw the faces of 3 men. One was her husband who betrayed her with her best friend, one was her stepfather who killed her mother, and the other was her best friend who wanted her dead. Ella was unharmed, so she was discharged the next day. Her best friend came to visit her at the office, and in the face of her best friend's care she felt nauseous. Soon after, her stepfather brought her beef bone soup. Thinking that her mother was hospitalized after eating 3 times of pesticide by mistake, Ella didn't dare to drink a single sip, and immediately poured all the soup down the drain. Afterwards, Ella found Lewis. Lewis was a former criminal investigator in the Major Crimes Unit, who resigned after being investigated for suspected bribery, and then became an insurance investigator. Ella hoped that he could investigate the cause of her mother's death, but not for the insurance company, but for herself. Of course, she would also pay Louis enough extra. That day, Ella got home from work early. As expected, her husband was not at home, so she called her secretary to see if her best friend Amy was still at work. After getting a positive reply from her secretary, her husband opened the door and walked in. Ella decided to give her husband a chance to explain, so she asked him where he had been that day if he hadn't gone to the gym. Her husband said that he had indeed gone to the gym that day, but he forgot to tell Ella that he had actually changed gyms. Ella then asked him about the text message. Her husband said that it was because he wasn't familiar with using the watch that he had mistakenly deleted it, and he had sent it to his high school classmate at the time. At this point, Ella suddenly remembered that her husband had a twin brother. Afterwards, her husband put his arm around her and said that it was because he had paid too little attention to Ella, that he had put such a lot of pressure on her, and said he would definitely be better to her in the future. Although her husband had explained a lot, Ella was still skeptical. Ella found her own psychologist. It turned out that she had been suffering from depression. Recently, excessive stress has aggravated her condition somewhat. After some counseling from the psychologist, Ella returned to the company. However, downstairs at the company, she saw the car In Tai-woo drove. She asked the security guard for details about the car. The guard said the car was registered in the name of the design team. Normally, the staff of the design team take turns using it. Ella wondered if she had misunderstood In Tai-woo, so she wanted to hear In Tai-woo's explanation. After the misunderstanding was cleared, In Tai-woo took Ella to his studio. He could tell that Ella had been particularly stressed recently, and that manual labor was a good way to relieve anxiety. Ella did feel relaxed, and she had a rare smile on her face. The next morning, Ella watched her husband send her daughter to school. As a father, Soo Shunyong was very qualified. On the way to work, Ella saw her stepfather standing in the rain, and her stepfather came here in the rain just to give her some side dishes. Ella couldn't help but think of when she was a child. After her mother married her stepfather was even nicer to her than her mother, and always treated her like her own daughter. After thinking for a long time, Ella sent her husband a text message. She asked her husband to have dinner with her that night, and thought about clearing everything up. After sending the text message, she received a call from Louis. Previously, Ella had asked him to investigate In Tai-woo's immigration records. In Tai-woo's parents died when he was very young, and he was adopted and brought to the United States. As far as Ella knows, In Tai-woo returned to China for the first time 4 years ago. Louis said that he did return to South Korea 4 years ago, but that was not his first entry. His first entry was 7 years ago. This shattered Ella's newly restored trust in In Tai-woo. Then the nanny called Ella again, saying that she had to leave work early today because of something that came up and that she might not be able to pick up Ruth from school, and that her husband's phone had been disconnected. Ella said she would pick up Ruth and asked the nanny to go home first. After the nanny left, Soo Shunyong changed clothes in the car and fixed his hair before walking home. When he arrived home, he put a document in the study and left again. The neighbor saw Soo Shunyong and greeted him, but he just glanced at him as if he didn't know him. The phone was still not connected to her husband's phone. Ella could only pick up her child from the kindergarten in person. However, the kindergarten teacher said Ruth had taken sick leave today. Ella immediately returned home after hearing this, but neither her husband nor her child was at home, so she started looking around. Eventually, an old neighbor told her that he had seen her husband take their child out of the house at noon. There was also a woman with them who didn't look like a neighbor, but they seemed to be on good terms. So Ella went to Amy's house. She knocked frantically, but there was no answer. When she returned home in the evening, her husband had already returned with their child. Seeing that her daughter was already asleep, Ella finally let out a sigh of relief. After that, she had a big fight with Soo Shunyong. The next morning, Ella went to the study to pick up the company's express delivery, but accidentally saw the documents that Soo Shunyong had brought back yesterday. Inside were a copy of her stepfather's house registration and a rental contract for her best friend Amy. Ella drove to the location on the contract and saw Amy just returning from the grocery store. Ella got out of the car and was about to go after her when she saw her husband and child arrive as well. This heartwarming scene pierced Ella's heart, so she had no choice but to temporarily leave. That night, she asked her daughter where she and her father had been during the day. Her daughter said she went to meet a friend with her father. Ella asked which friend. Her daughter said she didn't know because they didn't meet in the end. On the other side, In Tai-woo found Amy and said he hoped to talk to her. It turned out that he had seen the scene of Amy and Ella's husband together. In Tai-woo hoped that Amy would stop. Unexpectedly, Amy said the person she was dating was not Ella's husband. In order to know every move of her husband, Ella put a miniature camera in her home. This day, Louis found Ella and said he went to the hospital where her mother was rescued and asked the doctor about the 3 times her mother had drunk pesticide. The doctor said it should be 4 times, but the person was already dead when she went there for the 4th time. Louis also asked the doctor specifically why the medical record said it was an accidental ingestion, and the doctor said it was because the family said it was an accidental ingestion, and the patient also admitted that it was an accidental ingestion after waking up. Louis couldn't understand why both people said it was an accidental ingestion. After listening to Louis, Ella drove to her stepfather's house, and as soon as she met him, She asked her stepfather about her mother drinking the medicine. It turned out that Ella's mother had always been addicted to gambling and would run away from home whenever she had money and then come back home for money after losing it all. In order to get Ella's mother to quit gambling, her stepfather hid all the money and valuables. When Ella's mother saw this, she threatened to. Her stepfather said he thought she was just bluffing, but didn't expect her to actually drink it. Her stepfather was terrified by his mother, so he later gave her all the money. But who knew that as soon as Ella's mother ran out of money, she would threaten to drink pesticide, which led to her being hospitalized multiple times after drinking pesticides. Ella blamed her stepfather for not telling her earlier that after her mother died, someone told her stepfather that he could receive insurance money, and he used the insurance money to pay off his debts and buy a small apartment. And the person who told him that he could receive insurance money was Ella's husband, Su Shunyong. It turned out that Su Shunyong had always known about her mother's affairs. On the other side, Yin Taiwu found a technical colleague at the company. The furniture module with the camera was taken away by Yin Taiwu, but the memory card inside was damaged. Yin Taiwu hoped that his colleague could help to repair it. Soon, the colleague repaired the memory card. What they never expected was, the person who attacked Ella that night was Bai Shenkue, who looked harmless at the company. Bai Shenkue did not come to the company today, so Yin Taiwu found Ella's secretary, Li Xiumin, who was Bai Shenkue's girlfriend. Yin Taiwu asked her where Bai Shenkue had gone. Li Xiumin said her boyfriend had gone to Jeju, and that Ella had also gone to Jeju today. Yin Taiwu realized that something was wrong, so he immediately drove to find Ella. After dinner, Ella said goodbye to her stepfather and prepared to go home. However, just after Ella drove off, her stepfather went back to his room and threw his mother's photo on the ground. Then he recalled the scene when his mother drank the medicine and fell to the ground. Ella drove for a short while and then realized that the brakes on her car had failed. The car lost control and went on a rampage. This scared Ella. She could only try her best to control the steering wheel. Fortunately, Yin Taiwu met Ella at this time. Yin Taiwu followed her and turned into a small road. He caught up with Ella and asked her what was wrong. Ella said that the brakes had failed. In order to safely stop Ella's car, Yin Taiwu turned into another small road. Then he overtook Ella and finally drove his car across the road. Ella's car hit Yin Taiwu's car. After buffering for a distance, the car finally came to a stop. Fortunately, there was no serious injury. Both of them were unharmed. Yin Taiwu took a taxi to take Ella home, and then came to Bai Shenkue, but just arrived at Bai Shenkue's home, and saw the ambulance and the police here. It turned out that someone had fallen from the roof, and the person who fell was Bai Shenkue, who wanted to harm Ella. Yin Taiwu followed Bai Shenkue to the hospital. The doctor said fortunately it was stopped by a tree that saved his life, and then handed Bai Shenkue's belongings to Yin Taiwu. At this time, Bai Shenkue's phone suddenly rang. Yin Taiwu hesitated for a moment and then pressed the answer button, and the person who called Bai Shenkue was Ella's husband, Su Shunyong. The next morning, when Ella was getting ready to go to work, she ran into her neighbor. The neighbor told her about the time he had said hello to Su Shunyong. After hearing what the neighbor said, Ella couldn't help but start to doubt. Could there really be two Su Shunyongs? And then, sure enough, there were two Su Shunyongs. The Su Shunyong in the surveillance footage was at home playing with his daughter, while the other Su Shunyong appeared in front of her. Ella grabbed her phone and immediately ran outside to the company. She didn't have time to think about why there were two husbands, because her biggest worry now was her daughter's safety. Ella tried to drive but was stopped by Su Shunyong. In order to get home as quickly as possible, Ella got into the passenger seat. On the way, Ella called the nanny and asked her to go to the house immediately to check on her daughter. Upon returning home, she rushed to her daughter's room first and found her asleep. Then she asked the nanny if she had met anyone. The nanny said that when she arrived, only Ruth was home alone and seemed to be tired from playing and fell asleep on the sofa. Su Shunyong asked Ella what was going on. Ella asked Su Shunyong why he had left their daughter alone. Su Shunyong explained that Ella had sent him a text message saying that she had asked the nanny to come over to take care of the daughter and asking him to come to his company immediately and how she could blame him instead. After hearing this, Ella suggested to Su Shunyong that they should look for his missing twin brother. Su Shunyong said that what did his brother have to do with this, and that he had not had contact with his brother since his parents divorced when he was 13. Ella asked Louis to help him investigate Su Shunyong's brother Su Zhiyong. Soon Louis found his financial transactions and phone records, and his last known address. Ella decides to go to Su Zhiyong's home and take a look. On the other hand, Yin Taiwu asks a colleague to help check Bai Shenkue's phone records. The colleague finds a number that frequently contacts Bai Shenkue, but does not store a name. However, after storing the number and then checking the associated profile in the communication application, it turns out to be a picture of Ella's husband. However, the name displayed is Su Zhiyong. Ella arrives at Su Zhiyong's residence, but did not see Su Zhiyong's figure. From the neighbors, she learned that Su Zhiyong had left here a long time ago. It is said that he was not feeling well and went to a big hospital for treatment. The neighbors suggested that she could go to the town hospital for a look. When he used to live here, he often went to that hospital. In the evening, Yin Taiwu told Ella that her attacker was Bai Shenkue from the company, and the first person to call Su Zhiyong after Bai Shenkue fell from the building was. After returning home, Ella asked Louis to investigate Su Zhiyong's hospital records. Su Zhiyong was last hospitalized in 2015. He suffered from a serious lung disease, and every time he was hospitalized, he was not accompanied by family members. The doctor said that in the end, he himself proposed to go to a nursing home. Ella also asked Louis to help investigate nearby nursing homes. What Ella didn't know was that someone had been watching Louis's every move. For the safety of her daughter, Ella installed comprehensive surveillance in the house. Su Shunyong was very angry when he saw Ella install the surveillance system, and said that Ella's emotional outbursts really suffocated him. Ella asked Amy when she would introduce her boyfriend to her, but Amy said that you will be surprised when you see her. That day Louis told Ella that he had found Su Zhiyong, and Ella went to Su Zhiyong's nursing home as soon as she heard the news, but the staff told her that she was too late. The next day Ella rang the doorbell of Amy's house. Amy was very surprised to see Ella, and she asked Ella how she knew her address. Ella said she invited the teacher to dinner, and the teacher asked her to bring Amy along. So she gave her the address, and Ella's teacher is Amy's father. Amy wants to call her father to confirm. Ella asks her if she told her father that the two of them have fallen out. It's soon time for dinner. Amy's father is Ella's benefactor. He has supported and funded Ella's studies since junior high school. In addition to Amy and his parents, Ella actually also invited her husband Su Shunyong. When Amy sees Su Shunyong, they couldn't help but freeze for a moment. The reason why Ella set up this dinner was because while in the nursing home, the staff told him that Su Zhiyong had died last year, and that his brother Su Shunyong had personally handled the funeral. Ella repeatedly watched the surveillance footage of Su Shunyong at the company, and indeed discovered something fishy. It was the bow on her daughter's clothes. There was supposed to be one missing, but the two bows on her daughter's clothes in the surveillance footage were still there, which meant that the surveillance footage was actually fake. And with all these recent events, there has never been any Su Zhiyong. It was all just an illusion created by Su Shunyong. At dinner, Amy's mother said it would be nice to meet someone like Professor Su, but the next second Ella said Amy was already dating someone like him. Amy's parents were stunned. When she got home, Amy smashed the vase Ella gave her. Su Shunyong told Ella he had to go out, saying a friend had been drinking and kept texting him to come pick him up. Ella knew what her husband wanted to do, so she persuaded him to end it with Amy. But the next second her husband said why break up? The two had been in love since a long time ago. Ella never expected that her husband, who she had shared a bed with for 20 years, would say such words. Su Shunyong said that he had no choice but to borrow his brother's name, because his wife was a well-known and successful entrepreneur, and he had become a public figure as a result. After that, Su Shunyong proposed divorce to Ella, and said that he didn't want anything except his daughter Ruth. Ella couldn't understand why Su Shunyong was treating her like this. She asked Su Shunyong to explain. When she heard Su Shunyong say that there was no longer any affection between them, Ella broke down. In the middle of the night, she looked at the poison in the closet. This couldn't help but remind her of her childhood. When she returned from playing outside, she saw glass fragments and pills all over the floor, and her mother sitting on the ground with her bleeding wrist. This incident left a big shadow in Ella's heart. The next day, Su Shunyong went to his lawyer friend with the divorce papers. His friend couldn't understand why such a capable wife wanted a divorce. Su Shunyong's answer was simply that he had had enough. His friend asked what help he needed. Su Shunyong said he didn't want anything. He just wanted to keep his daughter with him. In Taiwu also knew that Su Shunyong had died, so he went to see Amy again. He asked her why they were trying to deceive everyone by involving the dead. Amy was quite open about it. She said it was all for Su Shunyong's sake, and she herself had actually wanted to make it public a long time ago. He told In Taiwu that Ella and Su Shunyong would immediately call for a divorce, and after the divorce, she would immediately marry Su Shunyong. In Taiwu and Amy met while they were in the United States. He didn't know that Amy was such a person, but Amy said she did it all for In Taiwu. Isn't he joining the company just for Ella? On the other hand, Ella went to a law firm to consult about child custody. The lawyer said that if you usually take care of the child more and have a better relationship with the child, even the at-fault party may get custody. And what Ella can do now is to find as much evidence as possible that Su Shunyong has destroyed the marriage. After Ella returned home, she went straight to Su Shunyong's study and started looking for evidence of her husband's infidelity. In the gap between the desk, Ella found a computer, and when she turned it on, an email message popped up, and in the video was Su Shunyong and Amy's happy moment. At this time, Su Shunyong came to Amy's house. As soon as he entered the door, Amy saw the wound on his face. Amy immediately asked how he got the wound. Su Shunyong then hugged her and said that it was all over. That day, when In Taiwu was checking Bai Shenkui's call records, he discovered another problem. Li Xiumin had told him that on the 20th, around 10 p.m., Bai Shenkui received a call that made him very angry. In Taiwu found that the caller was Su Zhiyong, but what was puzzling was that after Bai Shenkui hung up, he immediately called Su Shunyong. Could it be that Su Shunyong was not pretending to be Su Zhiyong? That night, Su Shunyong returned home. Ella said she agreed to divorce. Su Shunyong was very surprised to hear this. Ella said she didn't want to keep dragging this on either, and said she handed Su Shunyong a glass of red wine. At this time, the bottle of poison in the closet was gone. Su Shunyong fell to the ground after drinking the wine, spitting foam nonstop and begging Ella for mercy. At this time, Ella suddenly opened her eyes. It turned out that this was just a dream she had. Ella immediately went to the kitchen and poured out all the poison. She was afraid that she would really kill Su Shunyang if she wasn't sober. That day, a reporter found Lewis. The reporter showed Lewis a video. In the video, Ella was standing in the coffee shop, and she was having a seizure. In order to regain her senses, Ella's hands were tightly clenched around the broken glass. The reporter said that it was obvious that she was mentally unstable. He knew that Lewis had been working for Ella recently. He wanted to ask Lewis if he knew the specific reason. If he knew, it would be an exclusive story. After hearing this, Lewis asked him if he was sure it was an exclusive story. The reporter said that this was the original file. In order to prevent it from being leaked to others, he was sure that the coffee shop had deleted it before coming here. Before they parted, he hoped that Lewis could help him investigate. He will pay with money as a reward. Just as the reporter happily left, Lewis knocked him out in the garage and took the information and left. Ella had previously sent Ruth to her stepfather's house, and on this day, her stepfather sent Ruth back, and at a glance, he could tell that Ella's mood was not right. He came to Ella's room and saw the drawing paper all over the floor, and he couldn't help but feel distressed for Ella. When Ella handed her stepfather tea, he saw the wound on Ella's palm, and he asked Ella how she got it. Ella said she accidentally cut herself at work. Seeing Ella's forced composure, the stepfather could no longer stay. He went outside on the pretext of buying cigarettes. The stepfather felt that this was all his fault. It turned out that when Ella was at school, the stepfather had taken her to the hospital for treatment, but he never imagined that after learning that Ella suffered from bipolar disorder, the school teacher would ask Ella to transfer to another school because the classmates were afraid of her presence. The stepfather insisted that his child was not at fault. She was just sick, not a criminal. When her classmates saw the scars on Ella's wrists, they tried to draw one on her as well, but fortunately her stepfather arrived in time to drive away the bullies. On the way home, her stepfather walked with her for a long time, and Ella told him that she didn't want to go to the hospital anymore. After thinking for a long time, her stepfather agreed with her and decided to transfer Ella to another school and take her to a place where no one knew them and start a new life. They promised that from now on, only they two would know about her illness. So the stepfather moved with Ella. The stepfather felt that if he had insisted on taking Ella to the hospital, she might not be in so much pain now. Amy had a big fight with her father over dinner because her father felt that she was not as good as Ella. Amy told her father that she was getting married soon. That day, Ella arrived at the venue to check it out when a loud noise startled her. Many memories from 7 years ago came flooding back, and among them was the figure of Yin Tai-woo. 7 years ago, the day Ella took over as chairman of the company, Yin Tai-woo was still a hotel waiter. Ella wanted to take her medicine, so she asked Yin Tai-woo to get her some water. At that moment, her teacher Kwon Young-yi suddenly opened the door and walked in. In her panic, Ella dropped the pills on the floor. Kwon Young-yi told Ella to go to the meeting immediately. Ella wanted to pick up the pills on the ground but didn't know how to say it. Yin Tai-woo helped her out. Yin Tai-woo recognized at once that these were psychiatric drugs. After the meeting, he found Ella. Ella thanked Yin Tai-woo for what he had just done. Yin Tai-woo, however, said that the dose she had just taken was really too much. It turned out that Yin Tai-woo not only knew this medicine, but had also taken it himself. Ella didn't realize that she had hidden it from the people around her, but now a stranger had discovered it. Separately, Ella said that she would repay the favor next time they met, but when they met again, Ella had already forgotten about Yin Tai-woo. She asked Yin Tai-woo why he didn't tell her. Yin Tai-woo said that there was no point in speaking to someone who had already forgotten, but now that Ella can remember him, Yin Tai-woo was very happy inside. But what Ella doesn't know is, 7 years ago was not the first time they met. They met when she was very young, and Ella even gave Yin Tai-woo a name tag. Ruth's teacher called Ella to the kindergarten and told her about Amy visiting Ruth during the day, because Amy told the teacher that she was going to marry Ruth's father. So the teacher felt the need to contact Ella, and this was not the first time Amy had come to the kindergarten, because Ruth's previous homeroom teacher had also met her. Amy would occasionally come to the kindergarten to give Ruth her school supplies. Ella didn't expect her best friend to covet her husband, but she even had her eye on her daughter. Amy didn't know that she had already crossed Ella's bottom line. Ella called Lewis to meet up. After the meeting, she handed Lewis a USB drive. Yin Tai-woo went to the police station to find out about Bai Shenkui's fall. The police said they had investigated the scene, and there was nothing suspicious. They learned that Bai Shenkui owed a lot of debt. Presumably Bai Shenkui couldn't bear it anymore. After Yin Tai-woo left, the police immediately went to the bathroom and made a phone call. They told the person on the other end that Yin Tai-woo had questioned Bai Shenkui. At this time, Kwon Young-yi was watching the news about Bai Shenkui's fall. His secretary told him that the police had closed the case, and the surveillance had been dealt with. Kwon Young-yi told the secretary to pay close attention to ensure that there were no problems. Soon it was time for the unveiling of Amy's work. Ella had promised to help organize the unveiling. Ella also came to the event that day. At the unveiling, Amy first gave a speech. After the speech, her painting was officially unveiled. This work was a mural that Amy had done for Ella's company. As the company's president, Ella first thanked Amy. Ella said that since she had received such a valuable gift, she naturally had to return the favor. Afterwards, the secretary walked over carrying a bag, and the bag was full of money. Amy angrily threw the money on the ground. Ella is not stupid. She knows that this painting is Amy's satire on her, so Ella decided to destroy this painting. At the same time, the police found Su Shunyong and said they would investigate the company's design leaks. At this time, he received another call from Amy. Ella told him not to be surprised. This is just the beginning. Soon, Su Zhiyong's suspected theft of designs and preparations for divorce made the news. On the other side, Kwon Young-hee also saw the video of Ella destroying her daughter's painting, and also learned that the person her daughter is dating is Ella's husband Su Shunyong. Now Kwon Young-hee is preparing for his promotion to chief. He will never allow his career to be ruined because of his daughter's behavior. Kwon Young-hee told Amy to break up with Su Shunyong immediately. Amy, however, said that it is impossible for them to break up, and that after Ella's divorce, she and Su Shunyong will immediately get married. Kwon Young-hee said, "You even want to marry someone who Ella doesn't want? What are you thinking? Over the years, no matter what, my father would always compare Ella to her." This is what Amy finds most incomprehensible and unacceptable. So, unknowingly, Ella has become her nemesis. Amy threatened her father, saying what would happen if it was revealed that he had transferred his assets to invest in Ella's company. In a fit of rage, Kwon Young-hee slapped her directly. On the other side, Lewis came to Ella's company and gave her the clip of the reporter. Lewis said he would take care of the reporter. The insurance matter had been sorted out, so Ella wanted to terminate her cooperation with Lewis. Lewis, of course, was not willing to let go of this patron, so he told Ella that the reason they would reinvestigate her mother's insurance money was because they had received an anonymous report. Lewis asked Ella if she didn't want to know who the anonymous person was. That night, Ella suddenly heard another loud noise in the office. This made her can't help but think of the night she was attacked by the man in black, so she quickly locked the door to her office and was about to call the police for help when Yin Tai-woo's voice came from outside the door. Hearing that it was Yin Tai-woo, Ella's tense mood finally eased. Ella asked Yin Tai-woo what he was doing at the company so late. Yin Tai-woo said he had come to check for important emails, but in fact he was worried about Ella. When they got off work and pressed the elevator together, their hands accidentally touched. Ella asked him why he blushed, and if it was true that he always did that when he touched a woman's hand. As Su Shunyong hadn't been home for a few days, so Ruth kept asking for her father, Su Shunyong, to come to the kindergarten to see Ruth, but the teacher told him that Ella had taken Ruth off sick for a few days. That day, Yiling was playing in the courtyard when Amy suddenly appeared in front of her. No one knows what he told Ruth. Ruth has been crying nonstop since Amy left, so her stepfather had to call Ella back home, and Su Shunyong returned home at the same time. When Ruth saw her father, she immediately threw herself into his arms. The stepfather said that because Ella's phone had been out of reach, he had asked Su Shunyong to come home. That night, the stepfather hoped that she could forgive her husband, but at this point, Ella's mind was made up. In order to calm Ruth's emotions, Ella had to allow Su Shunyong to return home again. The next day, she consulted a lawyer about divorce. When the lawyer was talking on the phone with someone, he mentioned medical records. Ella then learned from the lawyer that if a spouse conceals a major illness such as a mental illness, it can be grounds for divorce. The lawyer said that if Ella had problems in this area, she must tell him. Ella suddenly thought of the medicine in the safe at home, so she immediately returned home. In order not to affect the battle for custody, she decided to throw away all the medicine in the safe. At this time, Su Shunyong suddenly appeared behind her. Su Shunyong came to see Ella in the hope that she would voluntarily give Ruth to him. Ella said she could not trust Su Shunyong, and now they are getting a divorce. Ella hopes that Su Shunyong can tell her the real reason for this, but Su Shunyong says he hopes she is the most miserable person in the world. Yin Tai-woo goes to the phone shop to repair Bai Shenkui's phone, and after turning it on, finds that there are many unread text messages, one of which asks him when he is going to pick up his luggage. Yin Tai-woo believes that this should be a friend of Bai Shenkue who is relatively close, so he contacts him and goes to Bai Shenkue's friend's house. It turns out that Bai Shenkue was going to move house, so he put all his luggage at his friend's house, but he hasn't been able to get in touch with him for a few days. Yin Tai-woo checked the things Bai Shenkue had left here, and found that Bai Shenkue was also a student funded by Iran Foundation, which is Amy's father's foundation. Ella called Lewis, and said she wanted all Su Shunyong's phone and financial records, in order to drive a wedge between Yin Tai-woo and Ella. Amy found Yin Tai-woo. She told Yin Tai-woo that it was not Su Shunyong who leaked the design draft, but the great Ella in his heart. Ella, in order to frame her husband, stole the draft Yin Tai-woo had worked so hard to design. But Yin Tai-woo's face did not change after hearing this. She told Amy that it was not so much Ella who did it, as it was more accurate to say that it was Yin Tai-woo who did it. He told Amy not to use this against Ella, and hoped that she would not contact him again in the future. That day, as soon as Su Shunyong got into the car, he noticed an unfamiliar mobile phone, and that the phone was full of call records with Bai Shenkue. Lewis found Ella, and gave her Su Shunyong's information. In addition, Lewis also told her that after Ella gave him the USB drive that day, a man named Ian Tai-woo found him. Ian Tai-woo said that there was anti-theft positioning software on the USB drive. He asked Lewis to return the USB drive to him, and then gave Lewis a new USB drive, and asked him to keep it a secret from Ella. That night, Ella came to attend the Iran Foundation's support night. Ella, as the former best scholarship recipient of the foundation, spoke on stage. She was going to use this opportunity to make public the scandalous affair between her husband and her best friend, because her lawyer told her that this was the only way to sway public opinion in her favor and be more advantageous in the fight for custody. However, just as Ella was about to speak out, her phone started vibrating non-stop. In addition to the threatening words in the text message, as well as photos of her in various situations at the time and in the past, when she saw the last photo of the pill bottle, Ella had to swallow the words on the tip of her tongue. Amy was overjoyed when she saw Soo Shun-young come to pick her up, but as soon as they met, Soo Shun-young asked if she knew Bai Shenkue. Amy said she didn't know who Bai Shenkue was. Afterwards, Soo Shun-young took out the phone he found in the car, because that car was Amy's, but Amy said it wasn't her phone. Soo Shun-young told her to stop pretending, and then turned around and left. Ella went home and looked through the anonymous text messages she had received again, and saw that the last message was a web address, with the words "Don't forget what you did that day." Ella clicked on it and found the official website of a company called Turin Bio, and the next day when she checked Soo Shun-young's call history, she also found a call from Turin Bio. Ella immediately called the number. She thought it was a company related to mental illness drugs, but it turned out to be a paternity testing company. After hanging up the phone, she hurriedly searched her daughter's study and really found an email from Turin Bio. Seeing the result, Ella immediately picked up her husband's and daughter's toothbrushes, and she didn't believe that Ruth was not Soo Shun-young's daughter, so she went to the identification center again to prepare to redo the paternity test. Ella remembered that the anonymous text message kept talking about the day 7 years ago, but she really didn't know what had happened that day, and the result of the second identification still showed that Ruth was not Soo Shun-young's child. At this moment, Ella's world collapsed. The secretary saw that something was wrong with Ella, so she called Ian Tai-woo. Ian Tai-woo received the call and immediately prepared to return to the company, but by this time Ella was walking outside the company. Ella finally understood why Soo Shun-young had said those unbelievable things, because she was the beginning of all this. So Ella began to try to remember what happened 7 years ago. Ian Tai-woo couldn't get through to Ella's phone, so he came to her house to wait for her. At this time a sneaky man came to Ella's house. Ian Tai-woo was noticed by the man as soon as he got out of the car, and the man immediately ran away. Ian Tai-woo saw this and quickly chased after him, and this person was no one else but the reporter who wanted to expose Ella's mental illness last time. Ian Tai-woo snatched the reporter's camera and found that there were not only photos of Ella, but also a video of Lewis hitting someone, so Ian Tai-woo took the reporter's memory card. At the same time, Lewis found Kwon Young-hee. It turned out that the surveillance footage of Bai Shenkue's fall was deleted by someone hired by Kwon Young-hee, and that person was none other than Lewis. Today Lewis came to ask Kwon Young-hee for money. That night Ella returned home. Soo Shun-young was drowning his sorrows in alcohol. Ella began to tell Soo Shun-young about what happened 7 years ago. That day was her first new product launch as chairman. At the reception after the meeting, Kwon Young-hee began to introduce Ella to celebrities from all walks of life. Ella didn't want to drink, but Kwon Young-hee kept dissuading her. Soon her consciousness became blurred. Ella stumbled towards her room. At this time Soo Shun-young called. Ella wanted to answer the phone but accidentally dropped it to the ground. At this time a man came over and helped Ella pick up the phone. Ella doesn't remember what happened after that. When she woke up it was already the next morning. Ella asked her secretary who had taken her back to the room. The secretary said she saw her walking outside while talking to her husband on the phone. Ella thought it was Soo Shun-young who had brought her back. After the secretary hung up, she received a call from Soo Shun-young. He had to leave early because he had a class today. However, when Ella was getting ready to wash up, she found that her usually clean husband had made a mess in the bathroom. She explained that she really didn't know that her child and her husband were not related. At this point, Soo Shun-young no longer believed in Ella because she never had the slightest sense of guilt. Now the whole family is ruined, and yet Ella still has the nerve to say she's happy. I wanted to kill her every time she did that, even though Ella kept saying she was sorry. Soo Shun-young had no intention of forgiving her. The only thing he wanted was to give up custody of their daughter. But Ella said she couldn't do that. Why was Soo Shun-young so obsessed with custody of their daughter? It turned out that from the moment the baby was born, this novice father couldn't let go. Since Ella was busy at work, it was naturally Soo Shun-young who took care of the baby late at night, even when he was extremely tired. He never complained. Later, when the child grew up, he simply quit his job and became a full-time father. More than 1,000 days and nights of spending time together made Soo Shun-young unable to sever this bond. When Ella heard her husband's cries, she was also a little overwhelmed for a moment. Just then, their phones both received a message at the same time. It's only the beginning. That night, Ella had a nightmare. Bipolar disorder can be inherited from parents to children. The scene of the mother holding her and jumping into the river became her holding her daughter. Ella woke up with a start. On the other side, Yin Tai-woo found out about the salesman's dealings with the police and threatened the two to hand over the surveillance video of the Bai Shenkue case. In the end, the police officer was afraid of losing his job and admitted that he had filmed President Kwan's daughter Amy that night. It turned out that night, Bai Shenkue didn't want to be manipulated by Amy anymore and planned to call it quits. However, Amy threatened him that if he stopped, he would tell his girlfriend about what he had done. The two then had a heated argument. Amy accidentally pushed Bai Shenkue off the roof. Afterwards, she used the white mobile phone to call her father and asked him to help cover up the incident for her. At the same time, Su Shunyong recalled what Ella had said during this period of time. It seems that she really didn't know anything, so he flipped open the notebook behind him. It turned out that she had been investigating this matter during this period of time. Now the white mobile phone is in Su Shunyong's hands. He called the service provider to check the message delivery record, but unexpectedly learned that the bishop Su Zhiyong. Just then, Amy came to Su to apologize to Shunyong. Su Shunyong had had enough. He had initially used Amy to investigate, but now the person was full of lies, so he decided to end the relationship and warn her to stay away from his daughter. However, in order to get the person she liked, Amy had no choice but to continue. Su Shunyong was puzzled by Ella's changes. When he checked Amy's phone, he accidentally found a recording of Amy asking her father for help. The next morning, after Ella got up, she made the juice Su Shunyong likes for him and told him not to exercise on an empty stomach, as if life had returned to its best. After Ella left, Su Shunyong found the medicine she had left in the fridge. On the other side, Amy came to the company to find Ella. Ella was very happy to see her. Amy couldn't help but be stunned when she saw this. Then Ella took out the contract and wanted to sign with Amy. Ella had previously promised to sign with her. After discovering Amy's betrayal, she cancelled the contract. Amy looked at the unusual Ella and couldn't help but remember when she was at school. Once Ella fainted, she forgot what had happened before. Amy said she would read the contract carefully before signing it. At this time, Ella had already completely forgotten about being betrayed. Amy, on the other hand, took the contract and walked out of the company with a smile. The secretary noticed that something was wrong with Ella, so she told Yin Tai-woo everything. Su Shunyong brought Ella's medicine to his father-in-law's house and told him about Ella's changes. After listening, his father-in-law still wanted to explain for Ella that it was just medicine for headaches, because he had promised Ella that being sick was a secret between the two of them. Su Shunyong saw that his father-in-law was not telling the truth, so he decided to ask the doctor himself. Amy met Yin Tai-woo when she left Ella's company. She looked like a villain who had his way with the world. After Su Shunyong left, his stepfather went to Ella's company. Although Ella looked like she was smiling at the moment, her stepfather knew that her illness had worsened. His heart ached as he turned away, holding back the tears in his eyes. On the other side, Su Shunyong went to the psychiatric department of the hospital. He gave the doctor the medicine and described Ella's condition to the doctor, but the doctor said that since the patient did not come with him, he was unable to diagnose him. When Su Shunyong got up to leave, the doctor told him Ella's current symptoms could indicate that her condition was deteriorating, and if possible, she should be hospitalized for intensive treatment. Su Shunyong was walking down the street when he remembered that Ella had actually displayed a lot of unusual behavior before. He had thought that it was because Ella was too obsessed with work, but now it seemed that it was all a manifestation of Ella's illness. And Su Shunyong is finally convinced that Ella really doesn't know that the child is not his. He thinks about his betrayal of his wife and the words he said, wishing that she would be the most miserable person in the world. Su Shunyong is filled with remorse. He tells his friend that he wants to find the child's biological father, but his friend doesn't support him doing so, because once the child's biological father is found, it will be even more disadvantageous for Su Shunyong to get custody of the child. He asks his friend if he can get Ella's forgiveness. Su Shunyong returns home, found that neither Ella nor Ruth was at home. He began to anxiously search for Ella. Su Shunyong himself had forgotten that today was actually his birthday. Seeing the surprise his wife and daughter had prepared for him, Su Shunyong's tears welled up again. He turned and left, coming to the door of the house. Ella saw this and also chased after him. She asked Su Shunyong what was wrong with him. Concerned, Su Shunyong then gave Ella the medicine and asked her how long she planned to hide it. Ella said she was afraid that he would be in pain if he knew, so he has been hiding it. Su Shunyong burst into tears after hearing this. The next day Su Shunyong decided to investigate who the child's biological father really was. He obtained all the footage from the press events 7 years ago and listed all the men who appeared, and Lewis also appeared at the cocktail party that night. Su Shunyong used the footage to identify the more suspicious people and then began to follow them in secret to obtain genetic samples, and he made identification papers one after the other, but he couldn't find Ruth's biological father. That night, Su Shunyong followed Lewis to the bar and got the bottle of wine he had drunk. The perceptive Lewis also noticed Su Shunyong. That day, Amy came to Ella's company. Ella told Amy that Su Shunyong knew she was sick. Unexpectedly, Amy started to sow discord after hearing this. When Ella returned home from work, she found Ruth hiding under the covers. crying. It turned out that a classmate had told her that her parents were getting a divorce. Ella hurriedly comforted Ruth after hearing this. This is not true. After Ruth fell asleep, Ella started searching online for news about her divorce. Outside the door, Su Shunyong was quietly watching Ella. He knew that Ella was suffering from dissociative amnesia. Su Shunyong then went to his father-in-law's house. His father-in-law finally chose to tell him about Ella's situation. Su Shunyong knew that Amy had been visiting Ella a lot recently. He asked Amy to stay away from Ella, but Amy not only refused, she even wanted to get back together with Su Shunyong. Su Shunyong saw this and pushed Amy by Shankue to fall from the building. She sent her father a recording of her asking for help. Amy panicked when she heard it. She pulled Su Shunyong and tried to explain. Su Shunyong didn't want to hear it and left, but Amy immediately forgot her warning and took the initiative to call Ella to go for coffee. The reason Amy approached Ella was to make Ella return to her old self. She couldn't accept Ella forgetting everything and continuing to live a happy life, so she deliberately asked her classmate Ruth to tell her parents about the divorce, in order to lead Ella to read the news about her divorce. But Ella didn't seem to believe the news was true, so Amy consulted her doctor friend again, who said that Ella was in a state of self-protection and would instinctively believe unpleasant things to be false. But if she could be reminded of her childhood memories, it might help her recover her memory. So while having coffee, Amy and Ella talked about their middle school lives and proposed going back to the school with Ella to take a look. Su Shunyong found Yin Taiwu and showed him a photo of a man, because there was no information about this man at the press conference, and Su Shunyong didn't know this man either. Yin Taiwu recognized this man as Amy's ex-boyfriend Jin Shengfan after just one look. He still remembered that Amy was very sad when she broke up with Jin Shengfan, and even wanted to commit suicide for a while. When Ella and Amy arrived at the corridor of their school, some vague memories flashed through Ella's mind. In the art room they found the paintings they had painted when they were in school. Ella remembered that before she transferred to another school, Amy had given her a box of paintbrushes and encouraged her to study art. She had also told her that the Iran Foundation could sponsor her studies. Ella felt that she was where she was today because of the help Amy had given her. So in Ella's heart, she had always been grateful to Amy. Su Shunyong returned home and received the paternity test results from Louis and Ruth. The results showed that the two men were not related. Now there is only one last person left: Amy's ex-boyfriend Jin Shengfan. Su Shunyong suddenly remembered that he had met Jin Shengfan once. The four of them had once had dinner together. At that moment, he received a text message from Amy. The text message contained a photo of Ella with an address attached. Su Shunyong immediately got up and went to find Ella. 7 years ago, Amy also received a photo. The photo showed her ex-boyfriend helping Ella into a hotel room. When Amy arrived at the door of the hotel room, she saw her ex-boyfriend open the door and leave. Amy was pregnant at the time, but she miscarried on the spot due to excessive grief. When Su Shunyong arrived, Ella and Amy were having dinner, and Yin Taiwu walked in. Amy had deliberately asked these two people to come over. After Su Shunyong and Yin Taiwu were seated, Amy started acting strange, saying that Ruth doesn't look anything like Su Shunyong at all. Amy wanted Ella to remember what had happened recently. She kept deliberately mentioning things that Ella had forgotten. Ella felt as if everyone was hiding something from her. On the way home, Ella hoped that Su Shunyong would tell her what was going on. Su Shunyong didn't say anything. Yin Taiwu couldn't understand what Amy was really up to. Amy said that everyone was defending Ella, but no one understood why she was doing it. It was as if whoever did the bad thing was in the right. Ella went online to check the news about herself and her husband, and found that everything Amy had said had been reported. Ella suddenly felt very strange about herself, as if she wasn't herself. A doctor friend told her that this was dissociation, and if the loss of memory was too serious, it could lead to amnesia and anxiety. That day Ella found Louis's business card in her notebook, and the words she had written about the police investigation into custody, so she called Louis and hoped to meet him. Soon Ella arrived at the meeting place with Louis. She now completely forgot about the deal with Louis. Louis was also a little surprised by Ella's change. From Louis, Ella learned that Su Shunyong had actually framed her for leaking the design. She did this because she wanted to gain custody of her daughter in the divorce proceedings. In addition, Louis also showed her many recent events. Ella couldn't believe that everything Amy had said was true. She hoped so much that this was just a dream. The next day, Amy came to the company again to find Ella. Although Ella had not recovered her memory, she understood that she had always been ill-intentioned, so the two once again tore each other's faces off. Ella asked Amy why she pretended to care about her and kept testing her. Amy told her to ask her husband. When she left the company, Amy received a call from Ella's stepfather. Knowing that she and Ella were on good terms, he asked if she knew what had happened between Ella and Su Shunyong. Amy just said "I'm sorry," and then told him about the affair between Ella and Su Shunyong. The stepfather never expected his son-in-law to cheat on him, so he gave Su Shunyong a slap in the face. The stepfather didn't understand why he had done such a thing. In the end, Su Shunyong had no choice but to tell his father-in-law the whole story. His father-in-law asked Su Shunyong what he planned to do. Su Shunyong said that he would take care of Ella until she recovered her memory. After Ella recovered her memory, he would do whatever she decided. In fact, The stepfather didn't want Ella and Su Shunyong to separate, so he suggested to Su Shunyong that they cover it up. Maybe Ella will never remember. Just like what happened 15 years ago. She doesn't remember now. Su Shunyong also thinks this is a good idea. So in the evening, he brought his daughter to the company to find Ella. Ella is very happy to see her daughter and husband suddenly appear. After that, the family of three came to the restaurant for the first time in a long time and had a happy dinner. And it's been a long time since Ella and Su Shunyong sat down and had a calm chat like this. Su Shunyong told Ella, in fact, he really hopes that Ella will not recover her memory. So Su Shunyong burned all the paternity test results, but Ella received an anonymous message. Even so, she couldn't escape the truth. That night, Ella had a dream. She dreamed that on the bridge, Amy was dressed in black and kept chasing her. And finally, she strangled her to death. Louis was investigating Amy and found out about Jin Shangfan. He suddenly remembered that he had met this person 7 years ago at a party. Jin Shangfan was on the phone asking about Ella's room and was collecting genetic samples with Su Shunyong. Louis suddenly had an idea, so he drove after Jin Shangfan. That morning, Ella was about to brush her teeth when some fragments of memory suddenly flashed through her mind. Yin Taiwu came to the hospital to visit Bai Shenkue, hoping that Bai Shenkue would wake up soon so that he could convict Amy. And just as Yin Taiwu was leaving, Bai Shenkue's fingers suddenly moved. Soon Louis found out the truth, and he was torn between who to give this to get a higher reward. On the other hand, Amy came to the Irin Foundation and unexpectedly ran into Jin Shangfan here. It turns out that he was the one Quan Yangi had recruited. Amy asked her father how he could let Jin Shangfan come to the consortium, but her father said not to bring personal feelings to work. In Quan Yangi's eyes, the harm his daughter had suffered was nothing. Louis took the truth he had found and went to see Ella and asked if she was interested in buying the truth. But Ella, who had lost her memory, refused Louis. Su Shunyong also received the paternity report from Jin Shangfan and Ruth. Ruth is indeed Jin Shangfan's child. Su Shunyong went to Jin Shangfan's company and unexpectedly ran into him in the elevator. What Jin Shangfan said on the phone made Su Shunyong even more furious. The drug's effects are no joke. A little more alcohol and the memory is erased. It seems that Ella was drugged back then. That's why she doesn't have any memories of that night. Su Shunyong went to Jin Shangfan's office and immediately pinned him to the ground and lectured him. Su Shunyong, who had learned the truth, felt even more guilty and distressed towards Ella. At the same time, someone came to Bai Shenkue's hospital room and injected an unknown drug into his fore. In the middle of the night, Ella got up to drink some water and suddenly remembered the scenes of him and Su Shunyong arguing. In order to make Ella forget all of this and to cover up the truth, Su Shunyong found Amy and knelt down to apologize. He didn't ask Amy to forgive him, but only hoped that she would truly let Ella go. Amy immediately became angry when she saw this. If she couldn't have him, no one else could. In order to regain her memory, Ella went to the bridge where she had first fallen into the river. As Ella walked step by step towards the middle of the bridge, all the lost memories came flooding back. Although it wasn't the first time she had learned about these things, it still caused Ella a great deal of pain. After returning home, she fell asleep. Ella didn't know how long she had slept. When she woke up, she found that she had more than 200 missed calls and text messages. At this time, a sudden knock on the door sounded. Ella opened the door and the police came in. Unexpectedly, sleeping for a while turned her into the murderer of her husband. Su Shunyong was killed without warning. Looking at her husband's cold body, Ella was extremely sad inside. She had thought of a million different endings with her husband, but she never thought Su Shunyong would die. Su Shunyong's body was found in the car. There were obvious strangulation marks on his wrists. The police speculate that he may have been tied up and forced to drink pesticides. According to the smartwatch Su Shunyong was wearing, it is initially concluded that he died at 1:42 a.m. The reason Ella was arrested is because the pesticides Su Shunyong took before he died were the same kind Ella had previously purchased. So Ella became the prime suspect, and she remained silent throughout the interrogation by the police. Eventually, Ella's lawyer came to the interrogation room. The lawyer was Yin Taiwu, who helped her find one. Soon the lawyer left the interrogation room. The lawyer told Yin Taiwu that the situation was not very optimistic, because Ella had a purchase record for the same pesticide, and Ella had always refused to say what she used the pesticide for. But the biggest problem was that there was no alibi for Ella. Meanwhile, the company's shareholders were already studying the possibility of convening a shareholders meeting to remove Ella as chairman. Soon, Ella's suspected murder of her husband made the news on all major television stations. Her stepfather was very distressed when he watched the news. At this time, Ruth walked out of her room. Her stepfather quickly turned off the TV. Ruth said she missed her parents and wanted to go home. That day, Quan Yanyi came to see an elder. As soon as he saw the elder, he asked why he insisted on handling Ella personally. After hearing this, Quan Yanyi hurriedly said that he only knew about it after reading the report. After hearing this, the elder couldn't help but praise him as someone who was good at politics. politics. Since you no longer want to use that sword, then completely break it. The next day, Ella applied to meet with Amy. Through the past 2 days of non-stop thinking, she finally figured something out. That the person who had been sending her anonymous text messages for 7 years was Amy. Because Amy had been by her side and her family's side for 7 years. Ella questioned whether it was Amy who had killed her husband. Now that her memory had returned in full, she then slapped Amy. Although the police currently considered Ella the prime suspect, but because there was no substantial evidence, Ella was released as soon as her detention period was up. As soon as Ella walked out the door, she was surrounded by reporters. Yin Taiwu saw this and quickly stepped forward to protect Ella as she left, because there were reporters at the company and at home. So Yin Taiwu suggested that Ella go to his house. The secretary dropped Ella and Yin Taiwu off at home and left. At this time, Ella said she missed Ruth. So Yin Taiwu drove her to her stepfather's house. When her stepfather saw Ella, his heart was finally set at ease. On the other side, a man reported to Quan Yanyi that Bai Shenkue had been dealt with. He would not wake up for a short time. The mother gave the little girl 100 yuan and asked her to go to the supermarket and buy a box of his favorite strawberry milk. The little girl happily went to buy the milk, but she accidentally discovered that her mother was putting something into the milk. Afterwards, her mother called her over and told her to drink the milk. The little girl knew that there was medicine in the milk, so she didn't want to drink it, but her mother said that it was her wish. In the end, the little girl closed her eyes and drank the milk. Her mother told her that she would wake up after a nap and everything would be fine. After drinking the milk, the little girl fell asleep, but soon she was awakened by the cold seawater, and this little girl was the young Ella. In the morning, her stepfather woke up and found that Ella was nowhere to be seen, so he began to anxiously look around. Yin Taiwu was worried about her and had been guarding the door all night. When he learned that Ella was missing, Yin Taiwu immediately drove to find her. The secretary told Yin Taiwu that she had logged into Ella's account and found that Ella had used her credit card to buy a ticket to go somewhere else. Yin Taiwu immediately rushed over. After Ella arrived at the beach, she recalled the time when her mother took her to the sea and threw her in. At this moment, Ella suddenly appeared tunnel effect. She walked towards the exit of the tunnel step by step. Soon the seawater reached Ella's waist. Luckily Yin Taiwu arrived in time and held Ella back. Yin Taiwu took Ella back to her stepfather's house. Ella could see Yin Taiwu's worry and anger, so she explained to him that she didn't want to commit suicide. Before parting, Ella asked Yin Taiwu if anything happened to her in the future, she hoped he could help take care of her daughter Ruth. The next day, Su Xuanyong's friend found Ella. He gave Ella a USB drive and said that Su Xuanyong had left it for her, just in case. The friend also told Ella about Su Xuanyong's investigation into Ruth's biological father, and that the USB drive contained recordings of Quan Yanyi's conversations with Amy. On the other hand, news of Ella's suspected mental illness broke online, and Quan Yanyi asked Yin Taiwu to convey to Ella that she should resign for the good of the company. Yin Taiwu told her what had happened at the company, and suggested that Ella refused to resign, but Ella thought that even if she refused, it would be meaningless. At that time, Ella received a call from her lawyer, saying that the results of Su Xuanyong's first autopsy were in. The autopsy report showed that Su Xuanyong's time of death was not 1:42 a.m., but between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m. That day, Yin Taiwu found Ella's doctor friend Xiujing, but after Yin Taiwu introduced herself, Xiujing said she had never met Ella before. It turned out that all the moments and conversations Ella had with Xiujing were all imagined by Ella. Ella resigned of her own accord and was admitted to a psychiatric hospital. Amy became the new chairman of the company. She walked into the office with a smile on her face and saw that Ella's name had been removed. Amy was so happy in her heart. Quan Yanyi also became an official as he wished, but the recording in Su Xuanyong's hands was always a thorn in his side. He suspected that the recording was now in Ella's hands, so he asked Amy to find the recording as soon as possible, because once that recording is made public, the father and daughter will both be finished, while Ella is receiving treatment. The doctor takes the initiative to ask her about the night she fell into the river. The doctor tries to guide her to remember the appearance of the person in black at that time. No matter how hard Ella thinks back, she cannot see the face of the person in black clearly, and for several nights in a row, Ella has dreamed about the night she fell into the river. The face of the person in black keeps changing in Ella's dreams. This makes Ella feel very painful. One day, she suddenly remembered the incident in junior high school. Then she also remembered the night she fell into the river. It turned out that there was no black man chasing her that night. Ella had jumped over the railing and into the river on her own. She finally realized how serious her illness was, so she made up her mind to cooperate with the doctor's treatment. At a meeting with other patients, Ella confessed her illness in public for the first time. Louis saw Ruth's portrait in Amy's studio, so he asked Amy why she had painted Ella's child. Is it because she doesn't like her, or is she ashamed of her? Amy, however, talked about Louis's past. I heard that he gambled away all the money he used to treat his wife. Louis's gambling buddy at the time was Ella's mother. Amy told Louis that the person who could truly fulfill his wishes was neither Ella nor his father Quan Yanyi, but Amy, who was sitting in front of him. After hearing this, Louis walked up to Amy and stabbed the knife in her eye, questioning her if she could bear the consequences. Yin Taiwu brought her younger sister Rachel to Ruth's stepfather's house. She and Rachel were both adopted by American parents. In order to prevent Amy from doing anything to Ruth, Yin Taiwu suggested suggested that Ella send Ruth to her adoptive parents in the United States, and that Rachel come here to get Ruth and her close to each other. Although the stepfather was reluctant to let Ruth go, it seemed like this was the best solution for now. While actively receiving treatment in the hospital, Ella began to find out the ins and outs of the whole thing through the materials Yin Tai-woo sent her. This day Amy brought toys to Ella's stepfather's house to visit Ruth, and even took Ruth outside without permission. Amy always thought that Ruth was her child, so she treats Ruth with great affection. She wants to leave her phone number with Ruth, so Ruth can call her if she needs anything. Luckily, her stepfather arrives in time to interrupt Amy and Ruth's conversation. Her stepfather warns her not to come here again, and not to try to get close to Ruth. Neither her stepfather nor Yin Tai-woo expected Amy to find this place, so they decide to send Ruth abroad as soon as possible. Amy hopes that Lewis can help him secretly find out the whereabouts of the recording. Lewis tells Amy the detective in charge of the Su Shunyong case had been replaced by Wu Xiuzhen, and Wu Xiuzhen was no simple person. He told Amy to be careful in the future. Meanwhile, Ruth had already arrived at the airport. Ella did not come to the airport, so she called and said goodbye to her daughter. Although Ella was reluctant to let her daughter go, but after sending her daughter off, she had no worries, so she could then focus on her revenge. That day Wu Xiuzhen came to the hospital and found Ella. Wu Xiuzhen said that she was now in charge of Su Shunyong's case, and asked Ella if she knew that Su Shunyong had gone to see Jin Shangfan the day before his death, and had beaten the other person up, something that Ella had never heard before. But because of this, Ella figured out the whole story. 7 years ago, it was Quan Yangi who gave her to Jin Shangfan. The person who picked up her phone and helped her into the room was Jin Shangfan. After a period of treatment, the doctor finally told Ella that she could be discharged from the hospital. That night, Yin Tai-woo came to Ella's house. Once, the family of 3 was so happy. Now, only Ella is left. The large house is a bit desolate, and Ella is now fully committed to her revenge. Ella asked Yin Tai-woo to help her with her revenge. Yin Tai-woo said he would fully support her. The next day, Ella found Jin Shangfan's girlfriend. The woman was beaten by Jin Shangfan and had scars all over her body. It turned out that while in the hospital, Ella had written a letter to Jin Shangfan's girlfriend. After learning about what happened to Ella, the woman decided to take revenge on Jin Shangfan with her, so she gave Ella evidence of Jin Shangfan's company's clinical trial fraud. Soon, Jin Shangfan was taken away for investigation. However, due to insufficient evidence, he was released. Jin Shangfan was short of money, so he sold his company's shares, and the person who bought the shares was Yin Tai-woo. That day, Jin Shangfan came outside after getting drunk in a bar. A man was silently watching him. The next second, the man started the car, put it in reverse gear, and slammed into Jin Shangfan. That day, Ella noticed a strange man leaving her house. The man didn't flinch when he saw her with Yin Tai-woo. Instead, he slowly closed the door and stared straight at Ella. It wasn't until he heard the siren not far away that the man turned and left. Yin Tai-woo helped Ella check all the doors and windows. He decided to stay with her tonight because he was worried about her. That night, Xiujing appeared again by Ella's side. Since Ella knew that Xiujing was a figment of her imagination, she decided that she would no longer be friends with Xiujing. No matter what Xiujing said, Ella would choose to ignore him. Nantesa found a letter from Ella at Jin Shangfan's girlfriend Jin Weizhu's house and gave it to Quan Yangi. However, Jin Weizhu had disappeared without a trace. Lewis said that this was the last thing he would do for Quan Yangi because he was going to go to Amy next. The person who hit Jin Shangfan that night was actually one of Quan Yangi's men. Lewis knew that this was a trap set by Ella. The aim was to get rid of Jin Shangfan through Quan Yangi. He then told Amy about it. Yin Tai-woo didn't expect Quan Yangi to go after Jin Shangfan so quickly, but Ella knew that Quan Yangi had always been a ruthless person. The students he funded through the Iran Foundation, who succeeded would be used as trophies, while those who failed would be made to do dirty work for him. That day, Ella's stepfather was fishing by the river. Lewis deliberately asked his stepfather for fishing bait. When his stepfather saw Lewis, he was very surprised. It seems that Ella's mother was indeed killed by her stepfather. Ella came to visit the late Su Shunyong and told him about recent events and her daughter's trip to the United States. Ella hoped that he would bless her daughter's safety. Just as Ella was about to leave, she happened to bump into Wu Xiuzhen. Wu Xiuzhen suspects that Jin Shangfan's case may be related to her, so she came to test Ella's words. Ella said that if she wants to interrogate, she can summon her to the interrogation room. Ella found Quan Yangi's secretary. Ella knows that his son is sick and needs an operation, so she specially introduced him to a doctor, and hopes that he will not be a father who has no face to see his son. As Ella was about to leave, the secretary stopped her. He told Ella that the night Su Shunyong died, Quan Yangi cancelled their meeting for the night and left in a hurry. He wondered if it had anything to do with Su Shunyong. Yin Tai-woo also found something wrong with Amy's alibi. He went to meet a friend of Amy's who had been drinking with her that night. The friend said that Amy had only arrived at the bar at 1 a.m. Su Shunyong's time of death was between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m. In other words, Amy had every opportunity to commit the crime. Amy had become the company's chairman, but the employees all resented her, and even complained about her in front of her face that the products had problems, and the company's treatment was not good at all. Amy never expected that her father would send her best friend Ella to her boyfriend's bed just to make her break up with her boyfriend. Amy met Jean Shangfan again 7 years later, and learned that it was her father who knew that Ella had taken drugs, and deliberately encouraged Ella to drink. So she angrily asked Kwon Young-hee why he had treated her like this. Kwon Young-hee slapped her after hearing this and said that it was all for her own good. But even after Amy found out the truth, she never felt the least bit apologetic towards Ella. That night, Louis came to Ella's house. Ella was not surprised to see him. She knew that Louis would definitely come looking for her for the recording. Ella told Louis that the recording was not here, and even proposed to collaborate with Louis again. She hoped that Louis would give her all the evidence he had on Kwon Amy and her father. But the next second, Louis grabbed Ella by the neck. Luckily, In Tai-woo arrived in time. In Tai-woo and Louis fought with each other, but after a few rounds, Louis called a stop. He asked In Tai-woo to go check on Ella's condition. Then he got up and left Ella's house. In Tai-woo felt that the house was really unsafe, so he suggested that Ella move to his house. But Ella refused after hearing this. Ella said that what they wanted was to make her afraid, so she must not back down. So In Tai-woo had to stay at Ella's house again. The next day, In Tai-woo found Kwon Young-hee's secretary. The secretary's son's surgery went very well. To thank Ella, he gave In Tai-woo a USB drive, but the secretary said that this alone would definitely not be enough to bring down Kwon Young-hee. In Tai-woo said that this was enough for now. On the other hand, Ella met with Counselor Park. She gave Counselor Park an envelope. Ella said she didn't want the counselor to get any dirt on him. In the evening, Ella received a call from her secretary Shingshi. In the phone call, Shingshi said that Bai Shengkue had woken up. Ella and In Tai-woo immediately went to the hospital. After the doctor examined him, he said that Bai Shengkue was fine. He just needed to recover for a period of time to get better. Louis, who had good sources of information, told Amy about Bai Shengkue's recovery. Amy felt that there was no rush with Bai Shengkue's situation, because she knew that Ella would not take advantage of Bai Shengkue so soon. But Kwon Young-hee didn't want to wait any longer, so he sent someone to the hospital to kill Bai Shengkue. This subordinate was the man who entered Ella's house that day, but when he arrived at the ward, he realized that there was no Bai Shengkue in the bed at all. Kwon Young-hee learned that Bai Shengkue had disappeared and ordered his subordinate to find him quickly. At this time, the secretary rushed into the office in a panic. The secretary asked Kwon Young-hee to take a look at the news. The news reported that the Iran Foundation had been seized and searched by the Procuratorate for involvement in huge amounts of bribery. After seeing the news, Kwon Young-hee immediately called the Secretary of Member of Parliament Park to meet with him. However, the secretary said that Member of Parliament Park did not have time recently and hung up the phone. In order to have more time to help Ella, In Tai-woo handed in a letter of suspension to Amy, saying that he wanted to take a 6-month break. Amy did not agree to his application. Just as In Tai-woo was about to leave, Amy finally couldn't hold back any longer and asked, "Where the hell did you hide Bai Shengkue?" That day, Ella barged into Kwon Young-hee's office in a domineering manner. Kwon Young-hee knew that Ella was the one who did the thing with the Iran Foundation. He told Ella not to think that a little rumor news could shake his career path. After hearing this, Ella took out her phone and played back the recording. Kwon Young-hee's face changed on the spot. He threatened that Ella would have to pay a price. In Tai-woo hid Bai Shengkue in a remote residence and hired several bodyguards to guard the place. Bai Shengkue couldn't help but tear up when he saw Ella. He regretted what he had done to Ella. That night, Ella returned home. A dark figure suddenly flashed past her. Ella went to the cloakroom and changed into her loungewear. Then she went to the study on the first floor. Just as Ella took out her phone and was about to make a call, the man suddenly covered Ella from behind and injected her with an anesthetic. Soon Ella fainted. When she woke up again, she found herself tied to a chair, while Kwon Young-hee walked in from the door. In Tai-woo came to Ella's house and saw the phone lying on the ground, so he immediately called Shingshi and asked her to locate Ella's location and call the police. What Kwon Young-hee didn't know was that Ella had let him kidnap her on purpose. Kwon Young-hee thought that Ella was now a lamb to the slaughter, so he freely admitted to Su Xuanyong's murder. Ella accused Kwon Young-hee of being a murderer, but Kwon Young-hee didn't think so. He blamed everything on Ella. Kwon Young-hee said that if Ella hadn't had a conflict with Su Xuanyong, Amy wouldn't have been with Su Xuanyong. If Ella hadn't provoked Amy, then Amy wouldn't have been involved with Bai Shengkue, and there wouldn't have been that recording file. If Ella hadn't lost her memory, Su Xuanyong would not have gone to Amy to kneel down, and he would not have done anything to Su Xuanyong. After that, Kwon Young-hee asked his subordinate Yoon Jae to hand him a bottle of pesticide and immediately pour it into Ella's mouth. Ella had to keep shaking her head and struggling. Yoon Jae saw this and slapped Ella on the back of the neck. Ella immediately lost consciousness. Then he grabbed Ella's head and opened her mouth. Just as Kwon Young-hee was about to pour the pesticide into Ella's mouth, In Tai-woo's voice interrupted him. Seeing In Tai-woo appear in the window, Kwon Young-hee immediately turned and fled. When In Tai-woo opened the door and walked in, he only saw Yoon Jae standing next to Ella. He wanted to go over and check on Ella's condition, but was stopped by his man, so the two men fought. At this time, Kwon Young had already come outside to the car. Im Tae-woo's appearance scared him, and he was sweating all over. At this time, Im Tae-woo was knocked to the ground by Yoon Jae. He picked up a stone nearby and smashed it on Yoon Jae's head as he walked up. Im Tae-woo quickly ran to Ella's side, but Ella was unconscious at this time. Yoon Jae behind him took out a knife and rushed at Im Tae-woo. Luckily, Im Tae-woo turned around and avoided Yoon Jae. The two men once again wrestled together. Im Tae-woo did his best but still couldn't beat the other party. Luckily, the police arrived in time. Yoon Jae heard the siren and had to retreat. When the police came in, Yoon Jae had disappeared without a trace. Kwon Young returned home and saw Amy waiting for him. Amy quickly asked her lawyer to give Kwon Young a document, which was the will she had written for him. Kwon Young never imagined that his daughter could be so vicious. As Ella did not drink too much pesticide, she soon woke up. Im Tae-woo was really scared by her. He couldn't imagine what would have happened to Ella if he had arrived a little later. He told Ella that she must never put herself in danger like that again. Ella was fine, so she was able to leave the hospital the next day. At that time, Woo Xiaojun went to Ella's room to ask her about the kidnapping, but Ella wasn't sure if Woo Xiaojun was connected to Kwon Young, so she lied and said she didn't remember anything. In the evening, Im Tae-woo asked Ella to stay at his place, but was again rejected by Ella, and Im Tae-woo knew that Ella would refuse, so he sent his bodyguard to guard Ella's house in advance. After taking Ella home, Im Tae-woo found Kwon Young's secretary. Chen gave Im Tae-woo a document, and Yoon Jae in the distance had a full view of the scene. The next day Woo Xiaojun found Im Tae-woo and asked him about the details of Ella's abduction that night, but Im Tae-woo told Woo Xiaojun that he couldn't trust her. Although he said he couldn't trust Woo Xiaojun, but during Im Tae-woo's conversation with Woo Xiaojun, he still felt that she and Louis were not the same type of person. This day is the day for the national audit of the Ministry of Culture and Tourism, where Kwon Young is located. At the meeting, Member of Parliament Park questioned Kwon Young as a suspect in the kidnapping of Ella. Kwon Young immediately retorted after hearing this, saying that this is nonsense, but the next second, Ella walked in as a witness. Kwon Young never expected Ella to appear at the National Political Supervision Conference, and his political career would come to an end at this moment. Ella took out the video of her being kidnapped. Kwon Young's crimes were also made public. It was learned that he not only kidnapped Ella, but also killed Ella's husband Soo Shun-young. The scene was instantly in an uproar. Kwon Young also tried to argue that the video was fake, saying that what Ella, a mentally ill person, said was not credible. But the next second Woo Xiaojun walked in and arrested Kwon Young on suspicion of kidnapping Ella and killing Soo Shun-young. In the police station, Kwon Young admitted to the fact that he had killed Soo Shun-young, but when Woo Xiaojun asked him why he had helped Amy fake her alibi, Kwon Young remained silent. His story quickly made the news. Amy didn't want her father to drag her down, so she first volunteered to be interviewed by the reporters and apologized for what her father had done. Amy felt that she should not be enjoying the world of injustice created by her father, so she decided to donate all of Kwon Young's property and her shares in Earring Group, and will actively cooperate with the investigation into what her father had done. After that, Amy took the initiative to go to the police station and find Woo Xiaojun to explain that Bai Shenkui's fall was actually an accident. Although Kwon Young had been arrested, Ella felt that this was not the end of the matter, because she doesn't believe that Amy had nothing to do with her husband's death. Ella tries to think of what she has missed. At that moment, she suddenly remembers that she saw Amy with Yoon Jae, and this is what Amy intended to do. Kwon Young took the blame for protecting Amy. Ella feels that Amy must have been at the scene when Soo Shun-young died. Now that Kwon Young has been arrested, Im Tae-woo is handed Bai Shen-kui over to the police and told Woo Xiaojun that she suspected Amy was behind it, so that she could start investigating with Bai Shen-kui's confession. It has to be said that Amy is a really ruthless woman. She killed Bai Shen-kui without blinking an eye. As long as Bai Shen-kui is dead, no one will ever be able to incriminate her. After Bai Shen-kui died, Amy smeared his blood on herself and then stood in front of Yoon Jae and let Yoon Jae beat her up. After Yoon Jae left, Amy sat by Shenkui's bed and pretended to be a victim because she wanted to frame Louis for the murder. Now Louis was useless to her. When Ella saw Amy coming out, she knew that Amy must have killed Bai Shen-kui. In the hospital, Amy told Woo Xiaojun that Louis had told her Bai Shen-kui's address. She just wanted to go and talk to Bai Shen-kui. She never expected Louis to kill Bai Shen-kui and try to kill her too. But Woo Xiaojun obviously didn't believe the one-sided story. Woo Xiaojun said that from the perspective of the motive for the murder, Amy was obviously more suspicious than Louis. Amy immediately looked very aggrieved after hearing this. She said that she had been threatened by Louis all along. Louis did this to cover up his crime, and the reason Amy can so confidently blame the crime on Louis is because the knife he used to kill Bai Shen-kui had Louis's fingerprints on it, and Louis had previously touched the knife at her house, so she used the knife to kill Bai Shen-kui, and that's how Louis became a wanted fugitive in the whole city. Louis had to take the money and go into hiding for the time being, while Amy appeared at Bai Shen-kui's funeral as if nothing had happened. Now Ella felt that only Louis would have evidence of Amy's crime. At this time, Louis was hiding by the river watching the news of his own wanted notice. Now he had indeed become expendable, as Ella had said. At the same time, Reporter Choi exposed the news that Ella's stepfather had killed his wife to claim the insurance money. The stepfather was also detained by the police because of this. And this information was exactly what Amy had provided to reporter Choi. That day, Louis came to visit his late wife and unexpectedly met Wu Xiaojun, who was looking for him. Wu Xiaojun wanted to take Louis back to the police station for further investigation, but was handcuffed by Louis because at this time, he had already decided to cooperate with Ella again. In the evening, Ella received a call from Louis. Louis told Ella that he had the truth about Su Xuanyong's death. He asked her to wait. When Ella returned home that night, she found a box on the ground. The box contained a USB flash drive. The USB flash drive contained the entire process of her husband's murder. It turned out that after learning that Ella was ill, Su Xuanyong regretted his betrayal of his wife, so she knelt down to apologize to Amy, hoping that Amy would forgive him and let Ella go. When Amy saw the man she loved kneel down for the person she hated most, she immediately went crazy. Amy knew that she would never win Su Xuanyong's heart, so she decided to ruin him. So she asked Louis to kidnap Su Xuanyong. Louis took Su Xuanyong to an abandoned factory, but he had already installed a miniature camera in advance. Soon Amy arrived here. Amy asked Louis to tell Quan Yanyi about her kidnapping of Su Xuanyong. Louis left the scene after notifying Quan Yanyi, and the reason Amy notified Quan Yanyi was to use a borrowed knife to kill. Quan Yanyi asked Amy what was going on. Amy said Su Xuanyong was threatening her with the recording, and that this matter would affect Quan Yanyi's career. So she had no choice but to kidnap Su Xuanyong. Quan Yanyi then told Yun Jae to knock Amy out. When Su Xuanyong came to his senses, he saw Quan Yanyi standing in front of him. Quan Yanyi told Su Xuanyong to hand over the recording file, but of course Su Xuanyong would not agree. So Quan Yanyi picked up the pesticide on the ground and poured it down Su Xuanyong's throat. Although they had long known that their husband was killed by them, but now she had witnessed the whole process of Su Xuanyong's murder. Ella was still in pain. In prison, her stepfather recalled the scene on the day of Ella's mother's death. Her mother drank the pesticide that day, but this time, her stepfather did not take her to the hospital right away. Instead, he stood by and watched her. By the time her stepfather took her mother to the hospital, her mother was no longer breathing. The doctor was not sure of the cause of death, so he contacted the police, because only an autopsy could determine the real cause of death. But after hearing this, her stepfather told the doctor that his wife had suffered a lot due to her heart condition, and that it made him feel uncomfortable to cut open a dead person, and hoped that the doctor would talk to the police and not perform an autopsy. The lawyer told Ella that if she wanted to win the lawsuit against her stepfather, she would have to prove that her mother was a compulsive gambler, and that there was objective evidence that she had threatened to ask her stepfather for money, even if her stepfather did not provide timely medical treatment to his wife. From his point of view, he did not think that his wife would die, and therefore would not be convicted of intentional homicide. Ella asked the lawyer if she could testify in court. The lawyer said that it was completely fine, but the trial department would be more convinced by the testimony of a third party than by the testimony of family members. So Ella and Yin Taiwu started to go around, in an attempt to find someone who would testify for her stepfather in court. But in the end it was all in vain, so Ella decided that she would have to testify in court herself. The day before the trial, Ella visited her stepfather in prison, and he tried to tell her the truth about her mother's death. But Ella interrupted him and told him not to say anything at the trial the next day, and to do whatever the lawyer said. The next day Amy arrived at the courthouse early to watch the fun. She mocked Ella, asking how it felt to have her stepfather sent to prison. The trial began soon after. Ella appeared as the only witness in the witness box, but the opposing lawyer kept harping on the fact that Ella had a mental illness. The stepfather couldn't bear to see Ella suffer because of him, so he volunteered to confess to the crime. At this, the lawyer stood up and argued that the defendant was only saying this because the prosecution had forced her daughter to do so. The situation was already not optimistic. Now that the stepfather has said such things, it is even more difficult to win the case. The lawyer said that they must find a witness who can turn the tables and prove that her mother did not have suicidal thoughts and was just used to taking pesticides, wanting to get money from the stepfather. Ella remembered the mobile phone Louis had left her and said to contact him if she needed anything, so he decided to let Louis testify. And Yin Taiwu also found the doctor who had saved her mother 3 times that year. Amy was afraid that Nan Taiba would testify in court, so she asked Yun Jae to kill Louis. Soon Yun Jae found Louis, and the two men fought as soon as they met. Although Louis was a former policeman, due to the difference in age and physical strength, he still took a stab from Yun Jae, and eventually Louis fell into the river. Seeing Louis lying motionless in the water, Yun Jae left the scene. When Amy received the text message, she was so excited that she didn't know what to do. Ella's stepfather's case was soon to go to court again, but Ella could not get in touch with Louis. At this time, Amy walked over with a smile and told Ella not to waste her time. The judge first summoned the doctor who treated her mother. The doctor's testimony only proved that Ella's mother had taken pesticides many times and could not be used as evidence that her stepfather did not kill her. Later, The judge summoned Lewis, but there was never any response. Just when everyone thought Lewis would not appear in court, the door suddenly opened, and Lewis walked in. Amy couldn't believe her eyes. He was clearly dead. It turned out that after Yoon-jae left, Lewis climbed to the shore, and his wallet with a family photo happened to save his life. After Lewis finished his testimony, Woo Seojin arrested him. Finally, the judge sentenced the stepfather. The judge believed that the mother was addicted to gambling and drank the pesticide with the intention of threatening her stepfather. The stepfather was so angry that he delayed the rescue. Therefore, it was ruled that the stepfather's intentional homicide charge was not established. However, because he refused a post-mortem examination, concealed the real cause of death of the victim, and defrauded the insurance money, he was sentenced to 1 year in prison, suspended for 3 years. When she heard the judge's verdict, Ella's heart finally sank. Amy, who had been so smug before, no longer had a smile on her face. They were both orphans from the same orphanage. Because he was adopted, he was bullied by the other children. Luckily, a girl walked by at that time and pushed the little boy who was bullying him away and gave him a good scolding. Before they parted ways, the little boy asked for her name tag, and this little boy was In Tai-woo when he was young. Ella kept her name tag until now. When Ella saw her old name tag and realized that In Tai-woo was the little boy from that time, she sighed that fate is really amazing. She hid the fact that she took medicine and had scars, but In Tai-woo found out twice. In Tai-woo said that was why he fell for Ella twice. Ella was very grateful to In Tai-woo for helping her. That day, Ella sent Amy a photo and an address. Amy immediately drove to the address in the text message, and this is where she kidnapped Soo Shunyoung. Ella gave Amy the video in her hands, hoping that she would feel even the slightest remorse. But Amy was now a different person, and told Ella to give the video to the police or send it to the media, because the person who killed Soo Shunyoung in the video was Kwon Young-hee. Looking at the unrepentant Amy, Ella made her final decision. On the way home, Ella drove, with memories of her and Amy's childhood filling her mind. But it was clear that the Amy from that time no longer existed. When Amy got home, she went straight up to Yoon-jae and slapped him. If he had gotten rid of Lewis in the first place, there wouldn't be so many problems now. Just as the saying goes, like father, like daughter. At this point, Amy also realized that she actually resembled her father so much. The next day, Amy resigned from her position as the company's chairman, saying that she wanted to take a break. On the other side, Lewis suddenly began to convulse and foam at the mouth in the police station. The police had no choice but to send him to the hospital for treatment. However, he used the excuse of going to the toilet to knock out the police guard watching him. Lewis called Amy as soon as he escaped. The two agreed to meet later to talk in detail. Amy didn't know that Woo Seojin and Lewis had actually conspired to knock out the police with the anesthetic that had been prepared for Lewis beforehand, and the one who came up with the idea was Ella. That night, Lewis came to the place where he had a deal with Amy. The two quickly completed the deal, but Lewis didn't leave right away. Instead, he started to get Amy to talk. Both of them were heard clearly by Ella behind them, but Amy didn't plan to let Lewis go. She would only feel at ease when the other person was dead. But Amy was only happy for 3 seconds when she saw Woo Seojin and In Tai-woo coming from afar and realized that she had fallen into Lewis's trap. Amy immediately got into the car and drove away. That was how Yoon-jae was caught red-handed, and Amy disappeared without a trace. Ella went to the police station to see Lewis. She found a lawyer for Lewis and told Lewis that if he was honest, the judge could exercise discretion, and he would be released soon. Amy being a murderer soon made the news, but the police never found her. Ella returned to the company and resumed her position as chairman. That day was Ruth's return date. Unexpectedly, Amy, who had disappeared for a long time, appeared at the airport earlier than Ella and picked up her daughter Ruth. In Tai-woo immediately notified Woo Seojin after learning the news. Woo Seojin dispatched all his men to rescue Ruth and capture Amy. Amy took Ruth to an ice cream shop and bought her lots of gifts. In the evening, Ella received a call from Amy. She told Ella not to waste her efforts. If you want to see Ruth, come home. Ella hurried home. Ruth was waiting for her mother. Ella went up to Ruth and gave her a tight hug. After repeatedly confirming that her daughter was safe and sound, Ella's heart was finally set at ease. At this time, someone handed Lewis a note in prison. Amy was walking down the street when a motorcycle suddenly sped past her. However, before she could recover, she was hit by a large truck the next second. Amy was lying on the ground with blood all over her face. At this moment, her mind was full of beautiful memories with Ella. Perhaps it was at this moment that Amy felt a glimmer of remorse, but it was already too late. Time quickly passed, and a year later, Ella, in order to further treat her illness, went to meet the real Seojin. Seojin officially became Ella's attending physician. During this year, the company, under Ella's leadership, rose even further. But Ella chose to resign from her position as chairman at this time because she felt that the meaning of life might not just lie in work. In Tai-woo replaced Ella as the next chairman. After leaving the company, Ella went on a trip alone. However, at the villa where she was staying, she had another vision. She saw her mother. Ella told Seojin about seeing her mother. Seojin said that this might be the destined order of things because her mother was the deepest knot in his heart. In order to completely untie the knot, Ella decided to ignore it and stop avoiding it. She returned to the villa again. The mother in her vision was gentle and considerate. Not only did she prepare a table of food for Ella, but she also kept showing concern for Ella. Perhaps this kind of mother is the one Ella yearns for in her heart. Ella asked her mother why she had taken her to the sea when she was 8, and why she had treated her so badly when she was young. Her mother was silent for a long time, and said that at the time, life was so difficult that she really had no choice, but she couldn't bear to leave young Ella alone. Although the conversation was created by Ella's imagination, perhaps her mother still loved her at that time. After receiving her mother's apology, Ella saw her mother's illusion disappear. That day, her daughter was playing in the yard when she suddenly saw a dead bird. Ella accompanied her daughter to bury the bird, and at that moment, Ella felt that she should not hide the fact that Ruth's father had passed away. She took Ruth to the cemetery and told Ruth that her father had also gone to heaven like the bird. Her daughter was in great pain after hearing this. After a long period of rest, Ella returned to the company as a designer. This way, while doing what she loves, she can also spend more time with Ruth. After being released from prison, Louis planned to go to San Diego to celebrate his release from prison. Wu Xiaojun also gave him a pair of shoes. Ella and Yin Taiwu went on a business trip together that day. Yin Taiwu finally found the courage to declare his feelings to Ella, as Ella actively underwent treatment and bravely faced her true self. The imaginary Xiaojing finally said goodbye to Ella. Now she truly understands that there is no so-called happy ending in life. Living each day to the fullest is the greatest happiness.